Greetings. Today is Tuesday, August 25, 2026. This is meteorologist Ruben Garcia. At the time of recording this video, it is 5:45 in the afternoon, local time in the Eastern Caribbean, where we are monitoring the evolution of a strong tropical wave located south of the Cabo Verde Islands, which has a high probability of tropical development during the next 7 days as it moves across the tropical Atlantic. Yesterday, the National Hurricane Center designated the disturbance as Invest 96. This means that we now have specialized track and intensity models, which we will be discussing in this video to determine whether there is any risk to the northeastern Caribbean and eventually to the Bahamas and the southeastern United States. But before giving more details about Invest 96, I wanted to mention that we also have a low-pressure system that was designated Invest 95, which has a medium probability of tropical development. However, it will move northward, remaining far from land areas. So it remains to be seen whether either of these two disturbances manages to strengthen into the next tropical storm of the season, which would be named Tropical Storm Dolly. But now we are going to focus on Invest 96. I will be discussing different scenarios, one in which it could remain on a track away from the Caribbean and another scenario in which the system could remain weaker and pass very close to or over the northeastern Caribbean. And this second scenario is gaining increasing support among the weather models. Let's zoom in on the infrared satellite animation. We can see the cloudiness and area of convection associated with this strong tropical wave, which since leaving Africa has maintained a fairly healthy area of convection, and this is why the National Hurricane Center has continued increasing the probabilities of development. In fact, this morning, the satellite measured some strong winds and a fairly well-defined circulation, which is why the National Hurricane Center at 2 in the afternoon increased the probability of development during the next 7 days to 70%. Also, notice that the area of possible development extends to longitude of 53 degrees west. And as you will see in the next few minutes, it is particularly in this area where conditions could allow tropical cyclone formation. However, as it approaches or passes just northeast of the Caribbean, it will encounter conditions that are not very favorable for development. This means that the initial window for development appears to be about 5 days, and if it fails to develop within the area marked by the National Hurricane Center, we would have to see whether, in the longer term, as it moves through the Bahamas region, it could find conditions more favorable for development. Now, let's look at the latest projections from the track models. Notice that there is good agreement during the next 3 days through Friday, when the system will generally move westward, but then the models diverge, with some showing a track toward the northwest, moving away from the Caribbean region, while others show a more westward track. Now, the difference between these two possible scenarios is the intensity of the disturbance. In the case of the models that develop a tropical storm or hurricane during the next 5 days, those are the ones that agree on a northwestward track, while those that keep it as a tropical wave or tropical depression are the ones showing a track closer to the Caribbean. The important thing is that the disturbance is between 5 and 6 days away from approaching the Caribbean, so we will have many days to monitor it calmly. And as I mentioned initially, the probabilities of development appear to be greatest before reaching longitude 50 degrees west, and this is mainly due to two factors. The first is that the tropical wave is currently surrounded by an area with plenty of atmospheric moisture, which creates favorable conditions for development and is represented in this image by the green colors. Now, as the disturbance continues moving west-northwestward, it will eventually encounter some dry air represented by the brown colors in this image. And notice that in approximately 5 days, when it approaches longitude 50 degrees west, the models project that dry air would enter the circulation of the disturbance and very likely cause problems for development or strengthening. And notice that during the next 48 to 72 hours, the tropical wave will be accompanied by an upper-level anticyclone, which provides good ventilation and protects the disturbance from wind shear. However, just like the dry air, when it is located just east of the Caribbean, strong wind shear is expected to affect the disturbance, making tropical cyclone formation or strengthening difficult if it passes near the Caribbean. And this agrees with the intensity projections from the specialized models. All of them maintain gradual strengthening during the next 72 hours, and the vast majority develop a tropical storm. However, notice that during the weekend, most of the models show weakening due to dry air and wind shear as it approaches the Caribbean, and in the longer term, if it moves just north of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and survives the dry air and wind shear conditions, it may once again encounter favorable conditions for strengthening just north of or near the Bahamas. And as you will see, this is precisely what most of the global models show us. For example, let's look at the latest run of the European model, which shows some tropical organization during the next 3 days, but during the weekend begins weakening the disturbance as it approaches longitude 50 degrees west. And this model has been consistent in eventually moving it over the northeastern Caribbean in approximately 6 days as a strong tropical wave. In this scenario, it is possible that it could bring some beneficial rainfall to the northern Antilles and Puerto Rico, but of course, everything will depend on how the disturbance evolves during the next 96 hours. In the case of the artificial intelligence version, it has been persistent in bringing a strong tropical wave over the northeastern Caribbean during the weekend between Sunday and Monday, while the American model continues to strengthen the system into a tropical storm or hurricane, and therefore keeps it on a track away from the Caribbean. And although other models were showing this scenario, the American model has gradually been adjusting its projection toward a weaker system and therefore bringing it increasingly closer to the northeastern Caribbean, but as a weakened system. In fact, the artificial intelligence version has been persistent in bringing a strong tropical wave over the northern Lesser Antilles on Sunday, and then crossing very close to or over Puerto Rico during Sunday night or Monday. And the German model also develops a tropical depression between Thursday and Friday and then begins weakening it as it approaches the northeastern Caribbean. In the latest run, it has a strong tropical wave or tropical depression moving just north of the Lesser Antilles during Sunday afternoon. And if we look at the members of the different models, in general we see these scenarios. For example, the members of the American model that develop a tropical storm or hurricane during the next 5 days. For example, the Ensemble members of the American model that develop a tropical storm during the next 3 to 5 days eventually maintain a track away from the Caribbean, while those that keep it as a tropical wave take it on a track closer to the northern Lesser Antilles. Also, notice that most of the members that develop the disturbance strengthen it once it reaches the subtropical Atlantic, which is the area where conditions will probably be more favorable for strengthening if it survives the dry air and wind shear that will affect it when it crosses longitude 50 degrees west. And the members of the European model show us a somewhat clearer picture. Notice that all of them keep the system as a tropical wave during the next 5 to 6 days, meaning that they do not develop it before it approaches the Caribbean. And those that do show development do so in the longer term if the disturbance manages to move north of the Greater Antilles, and some members develop a hurricane, since, as I mentioned, conditions in this area could be much more favorable. Also notice the great uncertainty, with tracks over the Bahamas and toward the state of Florida, while others head north-northeast, potentially posing a long-term threat to Bermuda. However, we have significant spread among the different scenarios, so at the moment it is impossible to know exactly which areas could face any type of risk. And in the case of Google DeepMind's model, which previously showed development between the Caribbean and Africa, now none of its members develop the tropical wave, and the only ones showing development are those that manage to take it into the region near the Bahamas, where once again conditions could be more favorable, either for tropical cyclone development or strengthening. And we see the same thing in the European model Ensemble, but in the artificial intelligence version, none of them manage to develop the wave during the next 5 days, and those that keep it weak bring the system as a tropical wave crossing just north of or over the northern half of the Lesser Antilles and Puerto Rico between Sunday and Monday, and the members that keep the system surviving the wind shear and dry air eventually develop it in the southwestern Atlantic. So, in summary, I can tell you that Invest 96 appears to have a window of approximately 72 hours to achieve some type of tropical organization, and we will see whether that is enough for a tropical depression or tropical storm to develop. But eventually, when it approaches longitude 50 degrees west, it will begin to feel the effects of dry air and wind shear that could limit its development or strengthening. And if the system does not manage to develop into a tropical cyclone before Friday, it is very likely that it will eventually pass very close to or over the northern half of the Lesser Antilles and Puerto Rico, where we hope it brings some rainfall. Now, in the longer term, if it survives this journey and manages to move into the area just north of the Bahamas, it could definitely encounter conditions more favorable for tropical cyclone development, and at the moment it is impossible to know whether it could eventually pose any risk to the Bahamas, Florida, or Bermuda. So this is why it is important to remain attentive, but calmly, because we will have many days to observe it. Also, remember that systems that are in the process of tropical organization have a great deal of uncertainty in the projections, and it is normal to see significant changes in the models during the next few days. Here at Hurricane Info, I will continue monitoring it closely to keep you informed, and I will record the next video tomorrow. So if you like this content, I invite you to give this video a like. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell so that you receive notifications whenever I record new videos. I hope everyone has an excellent afternoon and evening. Until tomorrow.